Cloud. Okay, now we're recording. Please go ahead. The screen is yours.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. Thanks a lot. And just to begin with, I'm giving some apology that I made the slides at the last moment, and I'm in my home, so my daughter might run around and come anytime. So that kind of disturbance is possible. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is this entropy current for high derivative theories of gravity. So let me start with the motivation, which is, I think, known. It's like an old problem. Nothing, the problem is not new in any sense, but let me start with the motivation anyway. In Einstein's theory of gravity, black holes are interesting physical objects that possess thermodynamic properties like entropy, energy, and temperature, etc. And these thermodynamic quantities turn out to be purely geometrical in black hole metric and satisfy the laws of thermodynamics. For example, entropy is the area of the black hole horizon, it's in geometric construction, and temperature is the surface gravity, etc. So it leads to the belief that these objects, meaning these black holes, are actually macroscopic manifestation of large collection of some microscopic states. And in special cases, these microstates have been constructed, counted, and count does match with the gravity calculation of entropy in appropriate limits. Now, in any UV complete theory of gravity in its low energy limit will typically generate higher derivative corrections to Einstein's theory. And black hole solutions continue to exist in these corrected theories. But now it turns out that we need to re-identify the entropy with geometry because the horizon area no longer satisfies the laws of thermodynamics in presence of higher derivative corrections to equations of motion. So in this paper, World and Iyer have given a construction of geometric entropy, which is called, it's named as world entropy, that satisfies the first law relating to nearby stationary black holes. They further have some generalization to dynamical situations also, but it's not the complete story. They themselves have said it. And we still do not have a completely general proof of second law involving arbitrary dynamics of black holes, though we do have proofs for special cases. So this actually set up the motivation for the whole set of work. So clearly,
Can
sorry.
I ask something?
Yes.
When you say arbitrary dynamics of black holes, what do you mean by that?
Arbitrary. Okay, what in our work, what we will be doing is uh, in our work, what we'll be doing is much less than the arbitrary dynamics of black hole. But to begin with, here in this basic philosophical sentence, by arbitrary I means arbitrary, just arbitrary, anything involving even the merger of black holes and so on. If that is what you have in mind, arbitrary means just arbitrary. But in our work, what I'll be presenting eventually, it's a very special type of dynamics, not arbitrary.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah, I can understand now. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So clearly in this context, the final goal would be to prove the second law for arbitrary black hole dynamics in higher derivative theories of gravity, or probably I should also add here, or finding some counter examples that if this kind of higher derivative theories we are considering, that then for that kind of dynamics, you won't be able to satisfy second law anyway, and therefore these theories are rejected. Some such thing are even more interesting. But the final goal would be to know the situation for any arbitrary black hole dynamics. That's the final goal. But however, we shall take up a much simpler project to begin with, as like probably everyone can understand it's a very difficult goal. So we shall take up a much simpler project to begin with. We shall consider the following dynamical situation. So suppose a stationary black hole is perturbed slightly by a small amount of infalling matter. Whenever I'm saying black hole, it's a black hole in higher derivative theories of gravity. So the black hole absorbs the matter, goes through our dynamics, and eventually settles into another black hole of slightly shifted thermodynamic parameters. The infalling matter is such that the dynamics remains of small amplitude throughout. And what I mean by small amplitude is that in our treatment, we shall ignore all terms that are nonlinear, like quadratic or higher order in the amplitude of the dynamics. So this is the kind of situation that I'll be considering, and we would like to see that at least in this situation, when some small matter is falling on a high derivative black hole solution and causing a little bit perturbation, whether that dynamics preserves, like maintains second law. So this is the dynamics that I'll be considering. Any question at this point? So for the type of black hole, dynamics we described before, like just now, we would construct an entropy density, which I'll call JV here, and a special current JI with the following properties. JV and JI locally depend on the functions appearing in the metric and their derivatives with appropriate index structure and contraction. And in stationary situation, integration of JV over spatial slices of the horizon reduces to the expression of world entropy and JI vanishes. And JV and JI together satisfy the following inequality throughout the dynamics. This is the entropy production kind of condition. So in usual fluid dynamics or language, what we call this is a divergence of entropy current being positive throughout the course of time evolution. If this equation looks similar to that, though it's not the same. So our goal would be to construct this kind of a thing, a JV and a JI, which satisfies this set of laws. And they are locally constructed out of horizon metric functions. So purely gravity, there is no dual description or anything being considered here. And here this del V is the affinely parameterized null generators of the horizon. Del I is at the spatial direction along the horizons. And H is the determinant of the induced metric on the spatial slices, like constant V slices of the horizon. V is the affinely parameterized null generators. It would have been nice to have a diagram here, but without the diagram, just let me know if it is okay. If it is not okay, let me know. If the thing that this is the goal, this is what we would like to do eventually, like in this work. We would like to construct a JV and JI which will satisfy this. So the strategy is the following. So the proof of second law in gravitational setup, even for black holes in two derivative Einstein gravity, is a bit roundabout. So schematically, it goes in the following way. So suppose this curly EVV, which is the VV component of the equations of motion, and that's the thing that we analyze to prove the second law. So this curly EVV is some EVV minus TVV, where EVV is the part of the equation of motion that involves only metric, and TVV is the matter stress tensor that includes the contribution of all other fields, and also matter, some like curvature matter coupling kind of terms also included in TVV. But we'll assume that TVV satisfies, and at least in two derivative gravity, it is just assumed. Here also we'll assume that TVV satisfies the null energy condition, which says that TVV is greater than equal to 0. And then the next step, this EVV is cast in the following form. This minus del V at this thing, and plus some nonlinear terms in amplitude, which are ignored. And therefore, this EVV equal to TVV basically says that del V of this particular quantity is negative definite, because we have a minus sign here. Is this steps clear?
Okay. Sorry, may I ask, how do you how do you know that this that you can define the EVV component in terms of the JV and the JI?
That's the thing that I'll be showing here. That is the crux of the proof. Suppose EVV is writable like this. So this is how the proof goes. Suppose I can write EVV like this.
Okay.
If I can, then EVV is this thing which will be like this null energy condition will tell me that this quantity is less than 0. And so we found this is less than equal to 0, or this particular function is a monotonically decreasing function of V. And in stationary black holes, we have a time-like killing vector, del tau, which on the horizon reduces to del V, because del V is the null generator of the horizon. So if you have a killing horizon, the delta will reduce to this del V up to some proportionality factor. So using it, we could argue that in far future, when the black hole settles down to stationary black hole, this quantity, this del V, JV, and del I, JI vanishes. So then what we found a function which is a function of V and monotonically decreasing and vanishes as V going to infinity. So from here, it follows that this quantity is positive for every finite V. So this is how the proof goes. Like first we have to rewrite EVV in this form, and we have to assume the null energy condition. If these two conditions, these two things, like null energy condition, we'll just assume, nothing to be proved. If we can write EVV in this form, then with the help of null energy condition, in this roundabout way, we can show that this particular quantity is positive for every finite V. So this is how the proof goes. The full strategy is like this. So our job would be to show that for higher derivative theory, any higher derivative theory, EVV could be written like this. So that's the whole proof is all about, and the talk is all about, that we could write EVV in this form. But just to point out the fluid context, it's a little different from how we prove this kind of things in fluid dynamics. Fluid dynamics, we directly prove this kind of a divergence is positive definite. We don't show that it's a monotonically decreasing function along some direction, and therefore, and vanishes at infinity, and therefore it is positive definite. So this way of proving gravitational thing is this is how it's a bit unsatisfactory, but this is how it works even for two derivative gravity. So background for our work. So the key tricky step here is to cast EVV as this form. Okay. In two derivative theories of gravity, this strategy is followed everywhere. Like in all proofs, whatever I have read so far about this gravity, entropy, positivity, and second law, this is a strategy that has been proved, that has been used. The singularity theorem, caustic, all these things seems like actually in terms of equations, this is what it is doing. Okay. But in two derivative theories of gravity, this follows simply as a consequence of Raychaudhuri equation for null congruences. So here in two derivative theory, this EVV is just RVV, the VV component of Ricci tensor. And if you explicitly calculate RVV, you will see that RVV is proportional to this del V square of square root H, where H is the determinant of the induced metric on spatial sections, plus nonlinear terms. So here we identify JV with the square root H, entropy density being the area density. And it follows that for black hole in Einstein gravity, total entropy is the integration of square root H, which is the area of the spatial sections of horizon. Okay. So in Einstein gravity, it works out like this. And in fact, if you take any fixed higher derivative theory of gravity, some specific theory, you can simply compute what the EVV is, and you can check whether it is true or not. So in a given theory, you can check it, and it happens to be true. So there is nothing to prove. Like it's just an explicit brute force calculation. But what we try to do to show some, using some argument, we'll show that for any higher derivative theory, this will happen. Okay. So in higher derivative theories, EVV will have higher derivative corrections apart from this just Ricci tensor part. Now the challenge is to show that EVV will have the desired structure for any arbitrary higher derivative corrections. Now in this paper, Aaron Wall, based on some symmetries of the horizon geometry, argued that almost all the terms in EVV could be expressed as this. There was no JI, he didn't need it. And he said that he could express it just del V square of some JV. However, this argument does not work for very few special terms in EVV. And it turns out those special terms where this argument do not work are the ones that are responsible for entropy in stationary black holes and therefore are relevant even for the first law. So this is the background how we get into the problem. We saw this thing and we wanted to explore these special terms. So as argued in this paper, this Aronval's paper, he said that since these terms are responsible for equilibrium entropy, we know that they must work out in the end. Because if they don't work out for second law, he can show that even the first law will break down. So therefore, then he didn't worry about those terms. He said they must be working out, so let's not worry about them. And then he worked for all the other terms and where he could show this thing and no current there. But we explicitly computed this term, these special terms, in the special case of 4 derivative theories of gravity. As just now I said that if you have a given theory of gravity, you can just compute EVV and check whether it's working or not. And we have seen that all the anomalous term in EVV that cannot be cast as del V square JV, like just with an entropy density, could always be rearranged as some del V of del IJI. So then it seems that at least for this anomalous term, there exists a current and there has to be a current. Only then everything will fall in place unless we take that current into account. So we look for a general argument to show that for any higher derivative theory of gravity, this thing will happen. Okay, I missed the minus sign here. Okay. Having a minus sign is not a big deal. If you don't have a minus sign, you just take it inside. Like you put a minus sign and put another minus sign. So we look for a general argument to show that for any high derivative theory of gravity, this way EVV could be written. And okay, for the convenience of presentation, here we often ignore factors of square root h, though they are important if you really want to get the correct result. But just for the sake of argument and the mechanism of how it is happening, these things are not so important. The square root h could be ignored, so I have ignored it. So now we shall outline the key steps in our proof. But before that, so far everything is okay. This is basically a story kind of thing, how we got into the problem. You please stop me if there is any question. There is a chat question. Do I have to look at chats? Achha, no. So now we shall outline the key steps in our proof.
Sorry, to clarify, this was just, I posted your slides, a link to your slides in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. Oh, there's a question actually by Daniel.
I see. So what am I, do I have to do anything? I'll just hear the question or do I have to do anything?
Yeah, he's about to ask, I think.
Yeah, so I agree in the 2 derivative case that this quantity is the entropy because of its relation to the horizon area. But in higher derivative theories, how you're calling it the entropy current. Is there some reason it's the entropy current and not just some current that is, positive definite?
It's a question that why in 2 derivative theories we don't have a current. Is that the question?
No, sorry, I don't know if I'm loud enough. I'm asking why you're calling it the entropy current in higher derivative theories.
Why I am calling. Okay, in 2 derivative theory, if you just work out, you won't see any current. There's no special component. You will have just a JV. So that just from explicit working out, you could see. And in higher derivative theory, if you just work out, at least for 4 derivative theories, we have seen the current. And now we have an argument that it will be there for higher derivative theory and will be there only from 4 derivative onwards. In 2 derivative, it won't be there.
I mean, the entropy has a particular thermodynamic interpretation. And I agree in the 2 derivative case that this current you find is related to the usual thermodynamic entropy current. But in higher derivative theories, I mean, is this current related to some thermodynamics of the black hole? Is that obvious?
the current is not related. In two derivative, there is no current, the way I'm saying. In the gravity, it's just the entropy density. And current is not, I can't see this current vanishes. The way the construction works, we can just clearly see the current vanishes whenever it's a stationary situation. Whenever there is a killing, the del V becomes proportional to the killing vector, the current vanishes. So therefore, in any stationary situation, the current is not there. It's there only during dynamics. And if you integrate it over or want to calculate the total entropy, it's not there. So in the first law, for example, where usually you take an integration over the cross-section, spatial cross-section, and find out between two stationary situations, this current will not enter. So you won't see the current there. So the current is there only during dynamics. So it appears only if you want to look at second law. And also if you want to look at second law in a local version, like if you are claiming that entropy in every point of the horizon, a dynamical horizon, the total entropy is increasing, the entropy density is increasing. If you're looking at that fashion only, then this current is there. If you're integrating it and calculating that net evolution of the total entropy, then this is a total divergence term and will go away if it's a compact surface, a compact horizon. If it's non-compact, then depending on boundary conditions, something will happen to it. So the current is there only for higher derivative theories, and in this way of looking at it, it turns out. So I would say that it's there only for higher derivative theory. First of all, that comes from explicit computation. So it's only for higher derivative theories. And the second thing is, just one second. And the second point is that if you sorry, my daughter came. So the second point is that if you integrate it and looking at an integrated version, it's not there. So it's like if you want to take your second law to a local point and entropy to the whole thermodynamics being true even locally, point by point on the horizon, if you want to do that, then this way of formulating it is useful. That's the thing. So that's what I can say. I don't know whether have I answered your question?
I'll ask more at the end of the talk.
Okay. Okay, so now I'll come to the key steps in our proof. So as I said, the key thing is that you have to write EVV in this form. That's my goal. So the first step is having we'll derive an identity, which is a well-known thing. And it's derived in Wald's paper also in many places, but in a form language. I've used just normal index language and calculated it. That's it. So it's an identity for this EAB, the gravity part of the equation of motion. So this is the only derivation that I have. And there are a few others. So that the action of the system is given the gravitational action plus the matter action. And gravitational actions involves only the metric. And EAB denotes the gravity part of the equation of motion. So what would that mean? That the variation of this gravitational action, square root GL gravity, is EAB equation of motion times the variation of the field, because this is a gravitational part. So by definition, metric is the only field here, plus some total derivative term. Okay. Make the total derivative term minus later. Okay. Now suppose the infinitesimal shift delta that we are considering here is generated by the Lie derivative L xi along some vector xi. Since S gravity is a scalar under general coordinate transformation, so this thing, the variation of the square root G L gravity will just be this. This del dot xi, this term is basically the variation of square root G, and xi dot del is the variation of L gravity, Lagrangian density, because of the change of its argument. So the variation of this action, gravitational action, is just this, the integrand. And if I substitute it here in this equation, we'll get the following. This side is a total derivative is equal to EAB L xi of GAB, because delta is generated by L xi. And same total derivative term with z, and delta g is replaced by L psi of g. And then, okay, from here to here, there is again a sign change. There will be some sign errors in my slide, sorry. So now I have substituted what is L psi of GAB. And after substituting it and doing some total manipulation, like taking the total derivative outside and taking inside, I could rewrite this equation in this fashion. It's a divergence of something. So far, it's just identity. I'm not using equation of motion, nothing. Like I'm not setting that equation of motion is equal to 0. So it's for any xi and any ZAB, this thing is true. I can write it like this, which is equal to xi b, then del A EAB. This nabla EAB, this term is a divergence of an equation of an divergence of a tensor which you have generated by variation of the action with respect to metric. So therefore, this term is identically 0. And this I have written the reason also, but I'm not going through it. So in the end, this is an identity that we had derived for EAB. Is just this, that this quantity, this 2 EAB is the equation of motion times xi b for any xi b, then xi a times L gravity, and this theta a, which is the total derivative term you have while varying the equation of, to get to the equation of motion. This quantity divergence of this is identically 0 for any xi and any metric. Okay. So this is the key equation that some little bit processing of this will be using to finally get the EAB and the component that we want to process. So is this derivation roughly clear? So I'm just using the fact that it's a diffeomorphism invariance of the Lagrangian and action that leads to this equation. It's basically the conserved current because of the diffeomorphism symmetry of the action. So it's a conserved Noether current. Now Noether charge for diffeomorphism. This is named Noether charge, though it's not really the charge, maybe potential or something. So there is a theorem that states that whenever we have a conserved current CA, locally we could always construct an antisymmetric tensor CAB whose divergence equals to CA. So if del A CA equal to 0, this implies that locally I can always write CA as del V CAB, where CAB is an antisymmetric tensor. CAB is equal to minus CBA. So here we have found that this thing is identically 0. So therefore it follows that this particular quantity, I can write it as del V QAB for some antisymmetric QAB constructed out of the metric and the vector xi a. Now this QAB is nothing but the dual means a Hodge dual of the Noether charge as described in IR World paper 1993. They called it a Noether charge Q. It's the same thing. Just I have computed it this way. That finally leads to the construction of world entropy. So this is an identity that I have derived for equation of motion. It's a very well-known identity. And the final result of step 1 is the following. This is the step 1 of our proof deriving this identity. That will contract this EAB with another xi a and we'll get this equation. It's the same equation. The free index also have contracted with another xi a. And this is the key identity involving the gravity part of equation of motion that we shall analyze to get the desired result. So this is one identity. It's a derivation of this that I have presented, but in the end, this is the identity that we have to remember. Theta is the total derivative term we get while varying the action. Q is the Noether charge that corresponds to that. It's called Noether charge that corresponds to this conserved current. Okay. So any question so far? This is the step 1, this particular equation, the step 1 of our proof. And now we shall set up a new coordinate system adapted to the horizon, which we shall use to analyze this equation. And then we shall use a symmetry of this system. In fact, the same symmetry that has been used in WAL 2015 to determine the structure of each of the term in RHS for a special choice of xi. So this each of the term will use some symmetry of my equation of the coordinate system, and will analyze each of this term in the RHS of the equation, and the LHS will become this EVV, the thing that we want. This symmetry-based analysis will show the desired structure for the special component of special component EVV. Now I'm coming to the step 2, which is the choice of coordinates. So the black hole will always have a horizon and null hypersurface. So we shall first set up a coordinate system on the horizon. So our coordinate system will be very much adapted to the horizon. So it will assume that there exists a null hypersurface in the system, which is the horizon. So suppose del V denotes the null generators of the horizon, where V is a affine parameter, which is one of our coordinates on the horizon. And del I are the special vectors which integral curves give the coordinates on the constant V slices of the horizon. Now we have to fix the coordinate. So these are the coordinate system on the horizon. We have del V, which are the null generators of the horizon, and V is the affine parameter. And then del I, which are the special vectors, which will be intersecting the del V's, and whose integral curves gives the coordinates on the constant V slices of the horizon. So this way we have completely set up one coordinate system on the horizon. And now we have to fix the coordinate that defined away from the horizon. To measure the distance away from the horizon. So we'll choose another set of affinely parameterized null geodesic del R shooting off from the horizon at a particular angle. And this shooting angle is fixed by the condition that del R will make an angle, some angle with del V, so that del R del V inner product becomes 1 and del R del I inner product becomes 0. Then integral curves of del R with R being the affine parameter, is the coordinate away from the horizon. And along each of these geodesic, the origin of the R coordinate is chosen at the horizon. So R equal to 0 will be my equation for the horizon according to my coordinate system. So here what I'm saying, that is some completely geometric way I'm setting up the coordinate system, and it shows that you can always do that. Whenever we have an horizon, we'll have the del V null generators, we have the del I spatial vectors there, and you can shoot off another set of null geodesics from them with making a particular angle with these things, and that will give us the coordinates. So that will set up a coordinate system. And it turns out, if we do work out all the conditions explicitly, it turns out that if we choose this kind of a coordinate system, the metric in this coordinate system turns out to be this. So my coordinates are xi, v, and r, where del r is null throughout, so dr square is 0, so there is no dr square component. And rest of the matrix is this kind of a structure. 2 dv dr r square x plus 2r omega I dv dxi, and some hij dxi dxj. The horizon is at the hypersurface r equal to 0, and you can check that there it becomes a null surface. The induced metric on any r equal to constant hypersurface is given by the following thing. Let me just drop the dvdr term. And clearly this metric becomes singular at null hypersurface r equal to 0, because these two terms drops out at r equal to 0. The metric, and that's okay because r equal to 0 is a null surface. So metric is not, induced metric is not well defined there. So the metric on the constant V slices at r equal to 0 is given by hij. All covariant tensors constructed out of metric and evaluated on the horizon will be function of x, omega I, and hij and their derivatives. And this last line is really important, that we have chosen a coordinate system. In this coordinate system, we can evaluate any component of any covariant tensor. And suppose we also want to evaluate it at r equal to 0. If I set r equal to 0, all of them will be functions of x, omega I, hij, and their derivatives, del r derivative, del v derivative, and del I derivative. And it is important to note that there is no way explicit factors of v or r or xi could come here. This we will be using in our proof, that if we evaluate any covariant tensor on this metric, and evaluate it at r equal to 0, we can't have any explicit factor of v on xi. You will have only these functions and their derivatives. So these are like the data of my construction. So this is the coordinate system. It would have been nice to have a diagram, but we don't at the moment. Is it, please let me know if it is not clear. But with this coordinate system, it's not completely fixed. Still, we have some residual coordinate freedom and symmetries, and those are the symmetries that I'll be exploiting to constrain the structure. So our choice of the metric does not fix the coordinates completely. On the horizon, we are left with a set of coordinate freedom. The way we have set up our coordinate system, we first set up a coordinate system on the horizon, and then we shoot off our coordinates. They're completely fixed once the horizon coordinates are fixed. But on the horizon itself, we are left with a set of coordinate freedom. We have not fixed the freedom of general coordinate transformation of the form where the spatial coordinates are mixing among themselves. We have just said we have chosen some coordinate spatial coordinate systems, but they can mix among themselves. So that freedom is anyway there. And we could redefine the affine parameter v as v going to some v tilde, which is like scaling the v parameter independently along each null geodesic, and also shifting the origin. So that freedom is there, and even if we do that, it will still remain affine. The v tilde is still an affine parameter, and therefore even with v tilde coordinates, we have to then realign my r coordinate because the coordinates have changed on the horizon. So the shooting coordinates also has to change a bit, but we can always, along with an appropriate redefinition of r coordinate, we could retain the form of the metric. So these kind of coordinate freedoms are the residual symmetry of my system, which is still there. Redefinition of xi is taken care of by making all analysis manifestly covariant. For example, converting all partial derivatives to di, which is a covariant derivative with respect to hij. So everything is written in terms of in a covariant manner with respect to hij. If we do that, the symmetry is automatically taken care of, the xi mixing. However, the symmetry under the redefinition of V is not manifest, and we shall use it, or the special case of it, to constrain the structure. So boost symmetry and boost weight. So this special case that we are going to use is called boost symmetry or boost weight of the thing. It's named as boost for some reasons which I'm not explaining in the talk. So this is my metric. A special case of V reparameterization that we shall consider is V going to lambda V, R going to R by lambda, and where lambda is a constant. We can clearly see if we do that in this metric, all the terms remain invariant. V goes to lambda V, R going to R by lambda, and lambda is a constant. So this will get cancelled here. Here R square and dV square, they'll get cancelled. R, dV, dxi, this R, always R and dV are paired up, so they will cancel. So the metric will have the same structure overall. So, and under this transformation, the partial V will go to 1 by lambda partial V, partial R will go to lambda times partial R, and covariant derivatives with respect to hij will again go to covariant derivatives. So that is not going to change. And the functions appearing in the metric, you will see, since all the factors of R are always cancelling the dv's, under this particular scaling, this omega I, x and hij will remain invariant. So their arguments will change, but apart from that, they will not change. They will not be scaled in any way. So under this transformation, the derivatives transform this way. This x and omega I and hij, their arguments have changed, but they have not changed. So this is the way they are transforming. And why are we looking at this transformation? Because as I said in the beginning, that in this metric, we would like to evaluate this EVV, theta, all that key equation, every quantities in LHS and RHS, we would like to evaluate in this kind of, in this coordinate system. And as I said, if you want to evaluate that equation on horizon, my building blocks will be this x, omega I, hij, and this derivatives. So these are my building blocks. In terms of them, I'll be evaluating all covariant tensor. And we want to use the symmetry, v going to lambda v and r going to r by lambda, to constrain the structure of all those tensors. So therefore, you would like to see how these building blocks are transforming under this particular symmetry, under this particular coordinate transformation. So covariant tensor components and boost transformation. We know how a component of a covariant tensor transforms under any coordinate transformation. So if T is some particular component of a multi-index covariant tensor, under this V parameterization, it will transform as lambda to the W and T arguments being changed. And where you'll see this boost weight W is the number of lower R indices plus upper V indices minus the upper R indices and lower V indices. Is this thing clear? It follows from this transformation. Any lower V index will transform like this del V. Any lower R index will transform like this partial R, and the upper V and upper R will transform exactly the inverse way. So therefore, in a T, I've suppressed all the index structure, but it has many indices. It's a particular component of a multi-index covariant tensor. So it will have many V, I, R indices. But the boost weight under this transformation, the scaling transformation, the total weight it will transform is basically the number of R indices and number of V indices it has in upper and lower thing. Because I indices do not change under this transformation. So using that, we could see that the boost weight of any such covariant tensor is the following. So if we have a covariant tensor component, just looking at its index structure, we can say how it will be scaled under this lambda transformation. But also on the other hand, we know that if we evaluate any covariant tensor component on the horizon, it will be in terms of the above building blocks, this x, omega I, hij, and these derivatives. And I also know how each of them will transform. So therefore, I have two independent ways of knowing the transformation. I know T is constructed out of this, and each of these building blocks transform in a given way. And I also know because T has a very specific kind of index structure, it has to transform in this particular way with a particular W weight, which is determined by its index structure. So it follows that for any tensor component with weight W, since X, omega I, and hij, they do not have any weight under this lambda scaling, all the weights of the tensor component has to be exhausted by number of del V's and number of del R's. So it turns out that this W, which is the weight of this tensor, will simply be the number of partial R's minus the number of partial V. So this is one information here, how the covariant tensor will transform and how it will. So this will tell us that a given covariant tensor, once we know its index structure, I know how many what would be the difference of the number of partial R and the number of partial V that is there. So these are the kind of things that I'll be using to constrain the structure of EVV. And the second thing, the stationarity and boost transformation, it turns out that in our horizon adapted coordinate system, the condition of stationarity implies that R and V dependence of the functions x, omega I, and hij must be through the product of RV. So if you are in a stationary black hole solution, then x and omega I and hij will not be independently depend on R and V, but it will be through the product RV. So del V acting on any such function will bring down a factor of R and therefore vanish at R equal to 0 unless there is also a partial R to pair with it. So in other words, any tensor component with W less than 0 will vanish on a stationary horizon. And also the excess of partial V operators over partial R's encodes the departure from stationarity. So this relation between a boost weight of a component of a covariant tensor, the stationarity, and the number of partials and a partial R and partial V's is the key. The relation between all of them is the key to cast EVV to the desired form. And these above conditions could be expressed more mathematically with an appropriate choice of xi and the Lie derivative along xi, which I'll come to later. So we have done, so the step 2 is basically a coordinate transformation, choosing a particular kind of coordinates, and then figuring out the residual symmetry, and under those residual symmetry, how a covariant tensor component will transform, determining that. So these are my step 2, and I'm just giving a summary of the step 2. These are the key things that we'll need for our proof. Now we have all the ingredients for the final arguments of the proof, but we shall summarize here the key points. In our horizon adapted coordinate system, the metric has one scalar, one vector, and one tensor Hij function of boost towards 0. So none of them transform under the scaling. Any covariant tensor component evaluated on the horizon could be written in terms of x, omega I, Hij, and or this type of derivatives acting on them. Boost weight of any tensor component is defined to be the difference between the total number of lower R plus upper V indices and upper R and lower V indices. And boost weight of any tensor component equals to the difference in the number of partials R and numbers of partial V's. Any tensor component with negative boost weight must vanish in stationary black hole, and any term with excess of partial V over partial R is proportional to the amplitude of the dynamics. So these are the key things which I have tried to argue, but these things will be used, and will be used in a very simple, like 12 standard way. I think like we don't need any sophisticated knowledge apart from 12 standard knowledge to see the structure coming out. 12 standard is Indian. I don't know whether it is there others. It's a school living exam is called 12 standard exam. So now step 3 is the, now finally the step 3, it's not the final, there's one small step is written, the choice of xi. So there's a xi vector everywhere in our in the key equation that we'll be analyzing. There's a xi vector floating around, so we have to choose that xi appropriately in this coordinate system. So we'll choose xi mu to be the vector generating the infinitesimal version of the above transformation. So lambda going to 1 plus delta lambda. So lambda is the transformation, and xi will be some, there will be a vector that will generate that transformation in an infinitesimal way. So infinitesimal way means lambda is 1 plus delta lambda, which leads to a change in V, which is proportional to delta lambda, and change in R, which is proportional to minus delta lambda. So from here, we could see that if we want xi mu to be the generator of that transformation, this coordinate transformation, the scaling of lambda, then xi A will take this following from V del V minus R del R. And from here, we could read off what are the different components, the lower xi R xi V component and the norm of xi as well. As xi, as I told, is the norm will turn out to be 0 on the horizon, because it's the generator of the horizon eventually. So it follows that Lxi corresponds to infinitesimal version of this V reparametrization or V scaling that we have described. So Lxi on a covariant tensor, it will be equal to the shift generated due to the scaling by lambda equal to 1 plus delta lambda. So one could further show that in stationary black holes, xi reduces to the killing vector of the space-time. And in other words, Lxi on any covariant tensor would be non-zero only if it is evaluated on a dynamical metric. Because stationary black hole xi is the killing vector, and Lxi will be 0 on any stationary situation. So further, from the linearity of Lxi operator, it follows that it captures the dynamics up to the linear order in the amplitude. So the Lxi that appears inside theta is basically, so in now our final analysis will come, and why we came to this Lxi just to analyze, just to say that. So this is the equation that we are looking at, we have to analyze in the end using all those boost weight and everything. And where Lxi is, inside theta, there is this quantity that appears Lxi of z, and this Lxi is basically this Lxi is basically nothing, but we've chosen xi in a way that this Lxi is basically nothing but the transformation generated by the lambda scaling that we have just now described. Okay. So now the final analysis, all the ingredients are there. We know the coordinate system. We know how tensor components transform. And under that, and the relation between partial V and partial R and the weight of the tensor component. And we know what Lxi means, how Lxi is related with this kind of symmetry transformation. So using all these three, now we'll analyze this equation that we had derived at the beginning. And this equation, we'll evaluate this equation on the horizon, and where in place of xi, I'll substitute the xi that we have just now derived, this one. So if you just substitute it, it turns out to be this equation, this xi is 0, as we have seen at r equal to 0. So this term drops out, and we finally get just this. So I have cancelled one factor of v, and we get 2v times evv is equal to theta r plus del mu q mu r. So this is the equation. And this equation, now I know the index structure, all of them are covariant tensors. So I know how many number of partial r and how many number of partial v's are there in any one of them. And I'll use them to manipulate the structure and get TVV in the desired form for any higher derivative theory. So that's the final goal. Now I'm almost outside the time, I think.
Yeah, you have some more. We started 5 minutes late. So.
Okay. Okay, so let me then go through it. I'm not sure whether anyone following, since nobody is asking. You said there will be lots of questions. Okay, now. So now I'll substitute it here. So substituting xi and evaluating on r equal to 0, we get this equation, which we'll be analyzing. The first thing, I'll start from left-hand side to right-hand side. So EVV is a tensor component with boost to it W, which is equal to -2. So you remember boost to it, number of lower V indices will give a negative. You'll add that with the minus sign. So it has 2 lower V indices and no upper R or no lower R indices. So it has -2. And it does not have any explicit V dependence. As I said, that any covariant tensor, once evaluated on the metric, it will not have any explicit V dependence. Now, theta r is also a tensor component with boost to it. W being -1 because it's one upper R index, which is equivalent to one lower V index. And del mu q mu r can be written like this, where the QVR has boost to it 0 and QIR has boost to it -1. So both Q and theta linearly depend on xi and therefore could have V dependence only up to linear order. CVV cannot have any V dependence. It's itself a covariant tensor and doesn't depend on anything. It's equation of motion component, doesn't depend on xi. Theta and Q does depend on xi with that Lxi business, but it's always a linear dependence. Lxi is always linear in xi. So therefore, theta and Q and theta will depend on xi, but the dependence maximum will be linear order. So it will have now a linear order dependence in xi says that theta r and q maximum can have a single factor of V, an explicit V, and EVV will not have any V. Now we'll use that to calculate structure, but it will be a bit tedious term by term. It's nothing elegant, term by term calculation, looking all the cases possible and then removing cases, like eliminating cases that this is not possible, that's not possible because this many number of V's are there, this many number of R's are there. So I'll just do one sample calculation, which is the simplest one among these many terms and many possibilities, just to show how it goes, in what way it is works, but that's not, there are many other such similar calculation has to be done to see how, what is the structure. Now we shall use all our relations about boost weight, stationarity and partial R's to constrain the structures of theta r and del mu q mu r. It is a repetitive application of the above relations for each possible term in a case-by-case basis. Here we shall present just one such piece of argument to show how it works. So consider the term in Q mu r that depends on xi. As I said, Q can have two terms. It doesn't depend on xi and one linearly depends on xi. Suppose we are looking at the term that linearly depends on xi. So this term must have the form like this. So W is a mu R having the structure, and there is one more index which has contracted with psi. So it must be of this form. It's on the possibility. And xi alpha, it's you're evaluating everything on R equal to 0. You're interested only on the horizon. So xi alpha is just V del V. So it becomes that V factor coming from this del V, V component of xi alpha, and therefore this is contracted with V. So this quantity becomes this. So now W, V, R, V has weight W minus 1 because V and R, they have opposite weights, they will cancel, and one lower V will have one weight minus 1. And W, I, R has weight minus 2 because upper R will have a minus 1 weight, lower V will have a minus 1 weight, and I doesn't have any weight. Therefore, both must be proportional to the amplitude of the dynamics. As we have said, whenever there is a negative weight, it has to depend on the dynamics. It will vanish on any equilibrium situation. So therefore, both has to depend on the amplitude of the dynamics. So now I have explicitly written out this term del mu q mu r because of this. So this is the q mu r, this is the del mu. I have dropped out factor of square root of h, as I said before, because they are not important, just to see how the argument works. So I've explicitly written and worked it out. Di is the covariant derivative with respect to the spatial metric Hij. So if I just work it out, the del V will act on V and will give this term. And the second term will be V coming outside and overall V factor coming outside and inside this thing. So you see this term will have two kinds of term, one with a explicit factor of V and another without any factor of V. And WIRV has weight minus 2 and therefore it must have 2 del V that can't be paired with del R. Because we have seen that whenever the number of boost weight says that the excess of del V operator compared to del R, so it is minus 2, so 2 extra del V must be there. So therefore, one typical structure in WIRV would be of this form. This AIK, del V of 2 plus K and V of 0. Where this K and 0 denotes the boost weight. So this is the minus K boostoid, this is a plus K boostoid, they will cancel and overall there will be a minus 2 boostoid because of the two factors of partial V. Now we'll keep doing the following manipulation. Suppose we have this kind of a term, this term. I took one del V out overall from here, 2 plus K has become 1 plus K and then this del V has acted on AI of K, which has made it AI of K minus 1. Because its boost weight have reduced, one del R in it has been paired with a del V. So then I keep on doing this. I can transfer del V's from here, put it here and can reduce the boost weight here. And I keep on doing this till all the K's are exhausted and we will get an AI0 here, del V square and V0. The plus minus sign is fixed whether it's plus or minus, but I just didn't keep track of it. Depends on what K is, whether it's even or odd. So minus to the 1 to the per K or something like that. It could be plus or minus, but that's not important for to see what is happening. So in the end, this del V square, from here also I do the same thing. I took one del V out, wrote it like this, and got a term which is of this from del V of AI0 and del V of B0. Now see this AI0 and B0 both are of boost weight 0 and both of them has an extra del V. So they are of boost weight minus 1, each of this term and this term. And a given boost weight minus 1 is linear in amplitude. A negative boost weight is linear in amplitude. So if I have a product of two such terms, so it's quadratic in amplitude. And therefore this term is negligible. So within our approximation, this quantity, WIRV, within our approximation could be recast, could be written always as this quantity where one del V has been taken out as overall. So this DIWIRV has this form then, where this YI is this thing. And then I can take an del V out and it becomes of this form, del V of DIYI. And you see, this is one desired structure. It's a divergence of a spatial current and you are taking a del V out of it. So what I have used is the boost structure and how the boost weight is related to the number of del V. That's the key thing that I have used and I can write it in this form. So this is actually the simplest manipulation, but it turns out that for all the other terms, the theta r, WVR, Q mu R, all the other terms in the equation, we could do the similar kind of argument of transferring del V and cancelling, reducing boost weight. And we could write it in this following form. The theta R in the end could be written like this A of -1 and B 0, these are the boost weights. And del mu Q mu R could be written in this form, WVVR, and this part I have just now analyzed. This is the thing, the xi dependent term, and there is a xi independent term which is like this. So this two rewriting up to nonlinear terms could be done just using boost weight and manipulating, taking V out, V in, and keeping track of the boost weights of the terms. That's it. Boost weight and the relation with V. Theta R you see has a boost weight -1. So this has a boost weight -1. V and del V, they have opposite boost weights and they will cancel. So this term doesn't have any boost weight. Here del V will have a boost weight -1, B0 is 0 boost weight by definition. So this matches. Here it is important that the factors of V as given are the only sources of explicit V dependence. Every other thing, this W, V, VR and these quantities, this is the tensor constructed out of the metric and therefore no explicit factor of V. So all the explicit factors of V are written out. For example, the functions A -1 or this Q0, etc. only have implicit V dependence to the metric functions, but no explicit V. Now I'll substitute this form of theta R and Q mu R in this equation. So we got this equation 2V, VV is this. We'll substitute the form here. And since it is an identity, we shall compare coefficients of V to the 0 and V on both sides. That will give me two relations. V to the 0 is this, because there is no explicit V dependence otherwise, and it's completely identity. It's true for all functions and everything. So no equation of motion, nothing has been used. So I'll just compare the coefficients of V on both sides. And I'll get two equations. This is the first term which must be 0 because left-hand side has a single factor of V. So this is a V to the 0 term in the right-hand side which must cancel among themselves to make this true. And this V coefficient of V is equal to EVV. So I compared these two coefficients and got these two equations. And substituting the first equation into the second one, we get the desired form of EVV. Then if I substitute this equation is here, this A -1 will cancel with this thing. So A -1 plus WVVR is equal to this. And if I substitute, we see that the EVV just turns out to be the form we have wanted. So del V of something plus DI of something. So here in many places, we have ignored factors of square root h, though they are important for the final result, but they are not important if we are just interested in the mechanism of the proof. So this gives how we could write it, and actually it ends my talk here. And this way we can show that we could always write EVV in the desired form, and then rest of the proof were already done long ago. So this analysis does not only prove the existence, but also gives an algorithm to construct the current, though we have not presented it here in detail. The existence of a spatial current makes second law of thermodynamics a local statement even in a gravitational setup, local statement on the horizon. So it's true, entropy is being produced at every point of the dynamical horizon. It's not the integrated entropy. So this analysis treats the dynamics up to linear order in amplitude. At quadratic order in Einstein gravity itself, we get entropy production. Since higher derivative corrections are suppressed by some UV scale, it might be possible to argue that such proof at linear order in dynamics is enough to show second law for higher derivative theories, though the issue might be more subtle there. So there are arguments where people, even in Aron's paper also, it's probably written that this is enough. Just linear proof is enough because for nonlinear order, Einstein gravity is anyway producing entropy for dynamical horizon, and all higher derivative corrections will be suppressed by some alpha prime scale or something. So they cannot change the sign anymore. So now future directions. So we have local versions of second law in fluid dynamics and theories of membrane. These are systems that are near some thermodynamic equilibrium, and the departure of equilibrium is treated in some perturbative scheme. It is possible to construct gravitational dual for both of these systems, and when the dual system contains a dynamical, and where the dual system contains a dynamical black hole or brane, This duality works out even with higher derivative corrections. Now we have a local version of second law, though only for linearized dynamics at the moment within pure gravity. So it would be interesting to see how this local fluid membrane entropy currents map to the gravitational version of the entropy current. Okay, thank you. This is the end of my talk.
Thank you very much for guiding us through this derivation. Do we have questions? I can start with a simple one, to some extent connecting to what I think Daniel was asking earlier. So what's not clear to me is still why you are certain that the current that you have defined, that you have written in your one of like your first few slides, like why that is the entropy current? Why is that not just some other current? Like how can you identify this as the entropy current?
How can I identify that's the entropy current?
Yeah, I asked before, and you told me that in I think it was around slide 10 or so. You mentioned that you assume, it's an assumption to begin with, that you can write slide a bit up. Probably it was on an earlier slide. Yeah, essentially.
Just a minute, before really here.
Yeah, right. So that's the first few terms there. So I understand that the first part was an assumption. So you're saying you assume EVV can be written in terms of this JV and JI in that form. And then you ran through your proof and you showed, as far as I understand, that this assumption is consistent for some current JV, JI. My question is, how can you identify this JV and JI as the components of an entropy current and not some other current?
Okay, first, I would say it like this. So what we can really identify is that JV is the entropy, density and entropy. Okay, so that part I have, that part I have not proved here, but JV actually reduces to world entropy and then satisfies the first law. So this is how, even in two derivative gravity, you identify something to be entropy. How do you identify horizon area to be entropy? Because you saw horizon area satisfies if you have two nearby black holes and you see that the change of horizon area, the two nearby stationary black holes, look at the change of horizon area and it looks like it satisfies the first law of thermodynamics with the change of energy, and like dE is equal to TdS, that kind of relation it satisfies. And then you identify that horizon area to entropy because it satisfies that law. And then you say that, okay, you look at it in a dynamical situation and you see it is increasing. So therefore it must be entropy. So that's how entropy is identified in two derivative theory. In higher derivative theory, horizon area does not work, but Wald has given a construction where you identify something to be the entropy because it satisfies the first law. So you basically construct the first law and you see what quantity you can construct on the horizon that will satisfy the first law, and you say that is entropy. Okay. So that's how this JV is identified with entropy. Now, that particular definition of entropy, world entropy, has been constructed only using first law, which is relating to equilibrium, nearby equilibrium black hole solutions. So first law relates them in a very simplest way. So that way you have defined some entropy, but you always have the freedom to add to the entropy any dynamical corrections. You can add to entropy anything that will vanish on equilibrium, but you can add to it because in dynamical situation you don't know what the entropy is. There's not even well defined, so you can add anything to it, And that's how this JV is constructed and corrected. So the goal is you construct something which will always be positive, definite, and will satisfy second law, and that will vanish in equilibrium, and therefore it will not hamper the construction of first law. So these are the two things you first assume, yes?
It's just so I understand. So may I phrase this as this is what you have worked with is one definition of like a near equilibrium entropy current, one possible definition.
These entropy currents are not defined in it's not defined. They vanish in equilibrium. They're just zero. Equilibrium situation is known.
Yeah. So as you said, you can define, if I understand correctly, you can define different trapped surfaces in order to relate them to some entropy measure. So I think you used the words. It's like the entropy is not uniquely defined out of equilibrium, right?
So entropy is not uniquely. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay, good. So in that sense, I was just paraphrasing that this is what you've shown is one current, one entropy current.
What I have shown is one entropy current, but it turns out that at least that very leading order, it's pretty much unique.
Okay.
Nothing else will work. After higher order, actually, you can, how much you'll put in entropy density, how much you will put in current, that freedom is there. But at very leading order, it's unique.
Okay, thank you.
Like if you just follow you are also giving an algorithm. So if you follow the algorithm, you'll see that nothing else will work because you already know what. So it's basically one extension of entropy density out of equilibrium that will satisfy second law. And if you want to extend the entropy density that way, you have to add a current also. Otherwise, things will not work. And that current is this one. It's a leading order. It's kind of unique. Yes.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there other questions? I think Daniel is now happy with the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt the discussion. That answers my question. Thank you.
Is there any question or just like he's very unhappy or he can phrase something?
No. So Daniel is happy with the answer. I think he said so. Like if
sorry, I'm happy with the answer. Thank you. That was the question I was getting at, how it was related to the thermodynamic entropy, the first law of black hole.
The first time you asked the question, that time my daughter entered and something going on. So then I couldn't.
Yeah, no, it's good. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions for now, we'll stop the recording here. And we thank, of course, Sayantani again for a nice talk.